plan, quote, a bad policy. He got a home visit from the cops, warned to tone down his rhetoric. So again, they mix in all these examples of people calling for them all to be gassed with what is clearly legitimate, quite neutral, quite laid-back criticism of the general migrant policy that's being enforced by these European governments. But we've had the rape scandals being covered up in Germany so as to not, quote, legitimize critics of mass migration. That came out before the mass molestation in Cologne on New Year's Eve, where hundreds of German women were sexually assaulted. And now Breitbart reports that a massive migrant crime wave is surging across Germany, according to figures buried in a new report released by the country's interior ministry. Again, they've tried to sneak this out. The data reveals that without migrants considered, crime rates in Germany would have remained roughly static since 2014. But in fact, the country recorded an extra 402,741 crimes committed by migrants. Bearing in mind, this is a country with a population of around 80 million. An extra almost 500,000 crimes committed by migrants in the last year alone in Germany. While much of this criminality concerned illegal border crossings, German authorities instead talked up a, quote, record surge in crimes by right-wing radicals, because that's the main threat, while women and children are being raped while these crimes are being committed by actual migrants on a record scale, while people in Bavaria are trying to obtain weapons licenses to get small arms to defend themselves against this. Of course, they're saying that the major problem is right-wing radicals. Because again, if you bury your head in the sand, if you engage in Stockholm syndrome, then of course the people speaking out against this are going to be turned into the bad guys, because that's what you can then focus on, that's what you can then say, we're dealing with it, while ignoring the real problem. Concerning statistics from the 135-page report reveal that 70% of pickpocketing, again, this is in Germany, one of the crime types on the rise, was committed by non-Germans. Of this figure, 34% was committed by recent asylum seekers, with the rest committed by non-Germans. Foreign nationals are thought to account for around 11 or 12% of the total population of Germany, but were overrepresented in every area of crime. And we've made the point again and again. You can look at every European country. You can look at the stats. You can look at Spain, which has a Muslim population of 3.7% that we know of. The prison population in Spain comprises 70% Muslims. From a population of 3.7%, the prison population is 70% Muslim. You can look at Belgium. Again, 6% Muslim population. Muslim prison population, 45%. And it's the same across other countries. Germany, it's slightly less, but it's still way overrepresented. Again, France is similar to Belgium in those figures, proving once more, multiculturalism doesn't work. It hasn't worked. People don't integrate. And now we're seeing the rise of Islamist ghettos in places like Molenbeek, which of course led to the protection of Salah Abdeslam, one of the Paris massacre suspects. They hid him. They protected him for months on end. Not other jihadists, not ISIS members, members of the local community. So these figures, these news figures out of Germany, again, just alarming, and they're blaming the right wing for this, the populists. Listen to this. Illegal immigrants and asylum seekers account for around 2.5% of Germany's population, but were also massively overrepresented. Amongst total offences, non-Germans accounted for 27.6%. Massively overrepresented. We'll get more into this and other news after the break. Stay tuned. It's the Alex Jones. We are back. It's the 4th hour overdrive of the Alex Jones Show. Next segment, we're going to get into this shocking report out of an NBC affiliate, which is completely bizarre if it's not just a direct propaganda blitz for microchipping your child. I mean, if you actually look into the background of this report, there's no other explanation than that they deliberately chose to present this as a kind of news package, the type that they got caught doing across the networks many years ago, where it was coordinated to push a certain product or a certain narrative. Again, this has no actual news value whatsoever. They basically go and talk to this mother of three who demands that she be able to microchip her child as an extra layer of protection. They talk to an expert who says that this is not Big Brother, it's not creepy at all. And the general tone throughout is that it's completely inevitable. That's why it looks like a deliberate propaganda placement, not an actual news item. Again, absolutely bizarre. We're going to get into that after the break. We're going to play the clip. Before the break, I was getting into this new report out of Germany where, imagine my shock, there's a surge in migrant crime. We've been documenting the surge in rapes in Germany for the past, 10 months or so since this mass wave started pouring in. And again, going back to these figures, amongst total offences, these are crimes in Germany, non-Germans accounted for 27.6%. while illegal immigrants and asylum seekers accounted for 5.7%. So again, massively overrepresented. In all of these cases, as well as those indicated in the chart, non-Germans and illegal migrants outstripped their proportions of crime to their representation in German society. Non-Germans accounted for 38% of all robberies, 38% of thefts, and 43% of thefts that involve a level of aggravation, such as assault or force. So again, in every single different crime that you look at, migrants, asylum seekers are vastly overrepresented, proving again that multiculturalism hasn't worked, it doesn't work. I mean, when it came out in Cologne, for example, that many of the molesters who sexually abused women on that night were not newly arrived refugees, some of them were, but the majority had been in Germany for years. So these were the supposedly assimilated migrants that were carrying out these mass assaults of over 1,000 women, and in other cities as well. These were the guys who we had supposedly integrated into society. And then you talk about the 1 million plus that have arrived in Germany over the past 10 months alone. You look at going forward, and I talked about this on last week's show, they're talking about 400,000 a year every year. And that's after the current wave of millions a year. And this is going to go on infinitely. And look at how they're treating it in Sweden. Again, the basket case of liberalism being a mental disorder. Report. Bearing in mind, this is a place where, their top advisor on Islamophobia, who calls everyone racist for criticizing raping women, he went on to join ISIS. They've got people who are ISIS supporters in control of their migration boards. That's how bad it is in Sweden. We've done reports on that before. But now Swedish police excuse migrant rape, blame Nordic alcohol culture and ignorance. They're actually blaming this migrant rape culture on masculinity in general. They're making excuses for the migrants. Again, the Swedish police report into rape and sexual assault committed by migrants has blamed Nordic alcohol culture, ignorance, and the non-traditional gender roles of European women for the growing problem. So again, the migrants don't have to assimilate into our culture. We have to assimilate into theirs. We have to cover up our women so they don't get raped. They actually blamed the non-traditional gender roles of European women. And they actually blamed women who don't dress properly. It's their fault that they're being sexually assaulted. Where are the feminists? Well, they're nowhere to be seen because, again, this can't be blamed on cisgendered white males. The report notes that Sweden has the worst rates of physical and sexual violence committed against women in the European Union. Titled The Current Situation of Sexual Molestation and Proposals for Action, the document seeks to explain these statistics, and it concludes, the results are a consequence of Nordic alcohol culture, but also of non-traditional gender roles. It explains on page 20 that, quote, the background to the men who commit sexual molestation is multifaceted. Migrants, it says, might not be able to handle the alcohol, simply feel horny, have ignorance of the consequences for the girls, have misplaced feelings, or be expressing anger. So again, it's all about justifying it to protect the precious Muslim migrants. We'll be back with more after the break. Don't go away. So we were talking about this report out of Sweden, where the citizens are encouraged to give up their garages to house Muslim migrants because there's a massive property shortage and basically nobody can get housing because they've handed it all over to the welfare wave of economic migrants now flooding northern Europe. And again, 1,400% increase in sexual assaults in Sweden since they opened their doors to mass immigration. And of course now they're blaming it on the right wing. In this report saying that the poor migrants who are molesting these women, these poor babies, and again, we've had the reports out of Sweden before, woman gets raped on a train, doesn't report it to the police because she sympathizes with the plight of the migrant. He might have experienced trauma in his home country. Therefore, it's perfectly justifiable and understandable for him to go around raping women. Of course, it has nothing to do with the culture within Islam across the world, whether people are traumatized or not, where women are treated as basically cattle. No, that's nothing to do with it. It's to do with them having, quote, misplaced feelings, according to Swedish police in this report. And this is how they express their anger. They can't handle alcohol and may simply feel horny. These are the actual quotes from this Swedish police report. Again, nothing whatsoever to do with the treatment of women as second-class citizens, as sexual objects being implicit within Islam, which is why we have the Taharush, the rape game as it's called. You saw the news reporter in Egypt during the revolution, again, raped by dozens of men. She thought she was going to die. You have other cases of that. There was a Dutch journalist who experienced the same thing, suddenly grabbed by 12, 14, 18 men, pulled down into an underground area, viciously raped. These people weren't traumatized. They weren't drunk. They weren't expressing their misplaced feelings. They weren't just horny. This is part of the culture. This is why there are girls and boys in these migrant camps being raped all the time. Yet now European countries are saying that it's acceptable for men in these migrant camps to marry 14-year-old girls. And now the Swedish police are blaming the rape scandal that they're experiencing and have been doing since they flung open their doors to mass migration. They're blaming it on misplaced feelings and Muslim migrants not being able to handle their alcohol. Maybe they're traumatized. Maybe it's the woman's fault because she's not covered up in a burqa. That's basically what they imply with this report. So again, similar to Germany, hiding behind excuses, blaming Nordic alcohol culture, which has been around forever, for this new phenomenon. Again, Sweden, this is another report. I remember in Sweden we had that incident in IKEA, I think it was last year, where 2 Muslim migrants beheaded someone, and then the government's first response was to organise a massive march and a campaign for people not to be mean to Muslims. Absolutely astounding. This is why it goes on and on. Hug a Muslim isn't going to work. Blood-smeared floors and walls of child migrant centre where a Swedish social worker, 22, was stabbed to death in a frenzied attack by an Ethiopian boy who is at least 21. And that's another thing. They always claim to be 15 so they don't face the consequences. So they don't get deported. They're held in juvenile detention for a year and then they're out on the streets again. Blood smeared across the floors and splattered up the walls. These are the horrifying photos from inside the child asylum centre where a female Swedish social worker was murdered in a frenzied attack Alexandra Messer, 22, bled to death after being stabbed as she tried to break up a fight involving two of the young migrants she was caring for. Psychology graduate